Hey everybody, you're now listening to Cup of Queens with Paige and Saray, and today we're so excited to have Brianne, the owner and creator of Tailorie. Tailorie is a new mobile app that helps you find brands and product recommendations tailored to you. Share, discover, and enjoy quality recommendations without ads, affiliate links, or hidden agendas.
Brianne has a ton of knowledge on owning and running multiple businesses. She spent 10 years living in New York, working in the modeling and fashion industry, which ultimately led her to her passion of retail and bringing the best products to her customers. If you're wondering how to take a leap of faith, this is the episode for you.
So grab your cup and enjoy! Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
We're so excited to meet you and talk with you. This is so fun.
Yes, me too. Thanks for having me. I was going to say us, but me.
We'll talk about the us that is involved with you and your team. You're in Grand Forks, right?
Yes, I am.
How is the weather there? I'm going there tomorrow and I'm a little nervous.
I think it's okay. It's cold. It's cold. Today it was like in the negative. And I was in Jamaica last week. And so it's cold.
Light years different.
Yeah. What part of Jamaica were you at?
I was in Negril. Have you heard of that? Yeah.
I have. Well, my mom and stepdad have been there, but I've been to Ochos Rio.
Yep.
At Montego Bay. So I just had to ask. But
Yeah. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, okay. Other than the warm weather and the fun trip, tell us about yourself and your business. We're so excited about what you do and to hear all the things.
Of course. So what do you want to know first? How about that? What part?
You should give us, because you have a pretty awesome backstory on kind of what you did for college and your life outside of the Midwest. So I would personally love to hear about that.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, so I grew up in the Midwest, and when I turned 18, I moved to New York City. And while it was like the day after I graduated, basically, I was waiting to go and go and go. So I packed 2 suitcases. I had like $2,000 that I had got from graduation money, and I booked a one-way ticket and left. I ended up staying there for nearly 10 years. I think it was about 8 that I was there. And for the first 5 years, I pursued a career in modeling. So I worked full-time as a model in the city. And then after that, I went to FIT, which is the Fashion Institute of Technology. And I ended up finishing my degree upstate New York at SUNY New Paltz in International Relations and Business. While I was there, I did some time abroad. So I was in Madrid for a while. And then I was home visiting for Christmas back to the Midwest, and I met my future husband. And so that is what brought me back to the Midwest. He's a farmer, so he obviously couldn't relocate his life. So it was on me to do so. And so I came back for that, and I had no idea what I was going to do, because I was studying international relations. I had worked in fashion and art. And Grand Forks is a fairly small town in the Midwest. So one of the things I did love about New York is just like the intellectual stimulation and all the different types of people. And so I was like, you know what, I'll work at the university. I can do that. I'll get my PhD and I'll teach. And so I went back to school to I ended up getting my MBA. And I worked at the university for about a year. And I was like, this just isn't for me. I needed something a little bit different. And so I ended up opening retail stores. So my first store I opened was 8 years ago now. It's called Curious, and it still exists in Grand Forks today. It is a home decor and gift boutique. And the reason I opened it is because I just wanted to be able to travel and find different products. And it was one of my favorite things about New York was just like stumbling across different things and, finding interesting products and conversation pieces to share with people. And so that was so much fun. I loved curious. And then from there, I opened a women's clothing store. And then ultimately, we opened a children's store as well. And through all of that is what inspired what I'm working on today, which is Tailorie. And I call it my own personal PhD research project that I did. And like my defining research for Tailorie is because a lot of the problems that we're solving were based on my experiences as a retail store owner.
My gosh.
Wow.
Okay. The background is just incredible.
Yeah.
Also, my dream is to literally move to New York. I'm so jealous of you.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because my husband, he's such a Midwestern, and I jokingly, we went to New York this year, and I jokingly, when I came home, I was like, what would it take to get me to move you to New York? And he's like, absolutely not for me. But did you love living there for the 10 years that you did?
I loved it. And I go back so often. There is something so special about New York. Like there's that people talk about the energy of the city. And when you're in it all the time, you can just feel it. Like there's always something happening. Like, I don't know, there's like vibrations in that city that are inspiring that you don't even recognize, like with the physical, but you can feel it. And I love that city. So whenever I'm feeling like I need a dose of creative inspiration, my husband now knows, like, I'll jump on an airplane and I'm like, I'm going to New York because I need to like be reinvigorated. So it happens quite often. I go there a couple times every year.
I think that is so cool. That's awesome. You're like, you know what? I'll be back in a couple days. I need to go recharge my batteries. And what you said about the energy is so true. Like when Saray and I were there back in the fall, it honestly feels like a whole different world. Like, I know that sounds crazy and we were only there for about 72 hours, but we were just running and gunning, and the energy and the people, and it was a real thing. So that's awesome. Also, I love that you left right out of high school.
That takes a lot of guts.
I think, and anybody who can do that is hats off to them. So
I'm glad I did it when I did it too. You know, just like going when you're young like that and have the opportunity and not a lot of the responsibility that comes later in life. Like it's such a freeing time. So I'm happy I went with it.
That's crazy.
Cool. So I really want to dive into more of like the technology world. And as you know, it's changing every day, I feel like. So how do you see that the technology world has evolved even in the last 3 to 5 years?
That is such a loaded question.
Whatever is comfortable.
I feel like it changes by the minute, literally. It is a loaded question.
Right. I guess like I can speak more to like the consumer technology world and the social media technology, because that's kind of where I'm working in right now. And so what we're seeing a lot of and why we're doing what we do at Tailorie is like a need for personalization in technology, especially from the consumer experience side. So wanting to have that like boutique type of experience where you're connecting with a human and getting like a personalized sense of transaction. I feel like right now technology in the consumer space is very transactional, right? Like there's no connection involved. You like go to a website, you make a purchase and like it's done. Maybe you'll follow on social or whatever, but there's not like that true sense of connection that I think people are craving more now than ever, especially after COVID. And so where I think technology is going in the consumer space is in making an effort to bridge that gap and make a more like personalized experience in the retail space.
So that is so cool. And I think you're spot on. I mean, I can't remember the last time I left a website and was like, wow, what a great experience. You know, you just think of it as we're kind of robotic almost in how we do online shopping or anything like that. So with Tailorie, tell us kind of who that is ideally meant for and what does the process look like within using that?
Sure. So I'm going to tell you first, like what Tailorie is. I always like to start with why, because then it's easier to understand the whole concept, right? So I started Tailorie because I was feeling frustrated on both sides. One on the retail brand side and the other on the consumer side. So my issue on the consumer side was kind of what we just talked about, where I felt like it was just a really transactional experience. And one of the things that I loved most about being a retail owner is I traveled to market every year multiple times, and I would go and meet the people who were creating these products that then I would take back to the store and sell. Yeah. And it was so relational. And when I got to purchase the products for the store, they'd tell me the story and they were so excited about it. And it just it made the experience feel more personal. Like you had that connection with them. It's like, I created these socks because I was climbing Mount Everest and then this happened. And then it gave a story to the product that you were buying, and it didn't feel so transactional. And I was like, this is so amazing. So we at Curious would do our best job to then bring that story back and tell it to the consumers when they came into the store. And people really love a good story. They love to buy stories. If you're looking at two identical products and somebody tells you the story background on one and not the other, and then they're same price, this isn't hard fact, but I would say 9 times out of 10, they'd probably buy the one with the story, right? And it's really, really difficult to do because unless you hear the story firsthand, you don't translate it the same way. It gets lost in translation. So I'd hear the story, I'd tell my staff, but it never went the same way. And I was like, this is really unfair. Why aren't we all having this type of experience when we're purchasing products? Why aren't we able to choose based on what the story was or how we connect to the person that made it rather than the end result and who had the most money to market it and get it in front of me? And because I met all of these, every time I'd go, I'd meet all these amazing brands that I had never heard of before. But as a retailer, I only had, I think we ended up with 5,000 square feet of retail space, right? But I couldn't have all the stories in there or the products. And then I was curating for that specific audience. So I'd be like, okay, I know my customer is this, and this, but I didn't like having to think of customers as a group of people. I wanted to have it for each individual, but I knew I couldn't do that well because I was only bringing back a subset of the products. And I was like, there has to be a better way for consumers to have more choice in their purchasing decisions and be able to find and locate these brands. And I was like, why am I, as a retailer, being introduced to them this way at market? Why haven't I heard of them? It's my job. Then I was like, and then as a consumer, they're not hearing about it. And so so this was before COVID, I was struggling with these problems. I'm talking, having these conversations, dialogues in my head. And then Tailorie started taking off and we started working on the product. And then COVID happened. And then physical retail was gone for a while, right? It was gone. We were only able to shop online. And I was like, oh, wow. If we shut this down completely, how are people ever going to get introduced to new brands and products? Because the cost of advertising just continues to go up. And as emerging brands and people who just fall in love with creating something, they're not well versed in digital marketing. It is a science and an art. And you need to compete in that space, you need to be well prepared. And so I was like, there has to be a way. So I'm like, how can we do this? So I want to connect stories and I want to connect people with the right products. And then we're like, well, how do we do that? Well, we all share recommendations, right? We all talk about the things we love naturally with our friends. You go out to lunch with your girlfriends. Oh, I love your necklace. I love your shoes. Where'd you get it? That's how recommendations happen. That's how we really find new things. Mm-hmm. But what we saw happening on the social space, and we did a lot of research before starting the product, was yes, people share these things on other social sites, but a lot of people feel uncomfortable doing so because they'd be like, but I'm not an influencer. So it would be weird if I tagged a product because that's not what I do. That's not my thing. But it's no, this is actually a natural part of what we do daily. So Those were all the thoughts, right? We put them all together, and what Tailorie is now, it's a mobile app. So you can think of it's a social media platform where users go to share recommendations with other people who share the same types of vibes, values, interests, social causes that are important to them. In addition to that, we also have brands on the platform. So there's no advertising on Tailorie, but instead we introduce you to brands who fit with your specified interest, taste, and preferences. So you can think of it sometimes, I like to say it's like a reverse marketing, where you as a consumer are able to say, these are the things that are important to me, and this is what I want to see. And then we show that to you. So you're targeting the types of products that are interesting to you rather than the other way around. That way, brands on our platform don't pay in terms of there's not advertising at all. It's based on who's the best fit for the consumer. And so it's a flat monthly fee for them to participate. The experience, I would say, has been, I don't know if you guys have been, but one of our most recent feedback sessions, someone said it's like kind of like TikTok and Pinterest had a baby. That's kind of like the overall.
I was literally thinking, I was like, this seems like a really well thought out, better option than Pinterest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that's what it's all about.
I might have missed this because you kind of broke up a little bit there, but so the consumer pays for the flat monthly, or the retailer, the brand?
The brands do. And the way we define brands on Tailorie, it's kind of a weird word because like basically on Tailorie, you can recommend any item that you purchase with money. And so then the person or brand selling it, or the business, we define as a brand. So people recommend everything from, clothing to home goods to chiropractors to hotels to whatever like they use their money to purchase.
Okay, that is so
I
cool.
am so happy that we met because this is going to be great for me. I'm so excited. So I'm curious because as far as like the people that are currently using Tailorie, do you see there being one category that is most often searched or utilized, or do you think it's pretty broad?
It's broad. So we set it up narrow to begin with because it's hard to start anything broadly, right? You have to focus. So we chose 9 categories, and they're all product-based categories to begin with. So it's personal care, kids, home, fashion, outdoors, but it's real food and drink. I actually think like food and drink gets a ton of recommendations, which I love because I'm like finding all these new like snack bars and things that I would have never known about. But no, it's really interesting. I would say like fashion is actually the least utilized category on Tailorie.
Isn't that wild how things are evolved to be maybe one direction and they totally take on a life of their own?
Yeah. And the grand vision behind all of this was like for experiences in general, right? So eventually like helping people find out the best option for them, whether it's like, this is grand future kind of thing. But if you're going to New York, the two of you, and you want to look for a restaurant that you're able to like say, okay, this is what we both like, give us recommendations for the two of us.
Gosh.
That's cool. I'm also ticked that
Why
we didn't
we know about this? That is
Awesome.
incredible. And I think that first off, I have to applaud you because you can tell you're just so passionate about this. And I think anyone who does anything with that much like heart is going to succeed, which obviously you have. But, starting something, especially like an app, I think that can sound intimidating. I mean, I know I've sat in a room with my friends and we've talked about things. We're like, what a great idea. But then it just kind of flops and it falls off the table and you never touch it again. So how did you, after kind of thinking of how important this was to you, what did you actually do to get yourself going? I mean, how do you construct an app? How do you build a website? How do you set up all of these tiny details to ultimately get you there?
And also too, I think going back to gaining confidence, and really believing in yourself that I'm going to go for this.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, and this is like what you, I guess, comes across and you saw, it was I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like something, and I did wrestle with it a lot because I'm like, I am number one, a female founder going into tech that is non-technical. And so, of course, what do I start with? Reading all of the things about that, right? Why you should not do this or pursue this path and how hard it is. Like read all of the things. But even after doing that, I was like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was like, this has to happen. And I just started doing one thing at a time, like researching as much as I can, reading, networking. I have friends that were working out in Silicon Valley that were also, in technology that I luckily was able to call and be like, okay, like, where do I go? How do I do this? And just, then I started talking to people about it and like, how do I go about this? And people just, would point you in a direction and you just kept following the direction and just kept making forward movement. And eventually it all happens. I mean, the product has been in development now for just under 2 years. But the conceptualization was far before that as well. So it's a long journey. It's not something that happens overnight. I had a lot to learn. And just if you want to do it bad enough, you'll figure out a way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. How do you, we talk a lot about balance or whatever that may be on the podcast. And so I'm really curious just because you are juggling a lot and wearing a lot of different hats. So, how do you find balance between the creative and technical and even the mom brain in your day-to-day life?
Honestly, I had to learn how to compartmentalize. And I was not good at that before. And I think a lot of times, like we as women are just naturally not good at compartmentalizing and separating. Like everything bleeds into each other, which is a beautiful thing. It's very beautiful. But in order to balance mom life, creative life, technical life, running a company, fundraising life, and then like still be able to sleep and exercise. Like I had to learn how to, like, when I'm here with this, I am here with this. And I don't think about anything else. Like none of the other things leak into each area. So I'm very intentional about focusing on what is in front of me and not letting anything else seep in. And then when I'm with whatever area I'm with that day, whether it's mom or work or no social, but I'm able to then, be fully present.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I'm sure throughout, you've done so much even before this business. And I'm sure there's been times where you have learned lessons, maybe the hard way. And so we want to jump into our segment called As You Shouldn't. And where this came from is we love to champion our queens that come on and talk to us. We love to say as you should, but deep down, we all know that there's been times where we're like, ooh, maybe shouldn't have, but ultimately you learn from. So can you give us a time where maybe you did something that you wish you wouldn't have, or that you learned a tough lesson?
Ooh, tough lessons. Yes. Let me think here. There's so many, right? So many. It's like, how do I choose? I think one of the toughest lessons for me, and it goes back to a question you asked me earlier, is like, how do you get all this stuff going? Is that I like held on to my idea so tightly in the beginning and not really wanting to discuss it because it wasn't fully developed yet. And I was so protective of it because I wasn't ready for people to like poke holes in it, right? Because like it's like a baby, and you're like, it's so like fragile at that point. So I protected it for probably longer than I should have, because after you start talking to people and sharing the idea, then I was able to progress faster. And then sometimes maybe when I do start talking, though, I divulge too much information. So that also is something that I've had to learn the hard way.
It's all about balance. Back to what we said.
Back to balance. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that's
on or off.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but just kind of going back to curiosity and, taking that leap. So how do you find, and what are different ways that you can recommend people to spark curiosity throughout their day? Or maybe, it's winter here for probably longer than summer, so how can people find that motivation?
For curiosity, I mean, the one like most enjoyable things about having children is just like watching them be curious naturally all the time. And you see the way that they do that is by just asking why. And it's such a simple question and they ask it constantly. But as adults, we sometimes stop asking why, right? Because like the answers behind why are sometimes things we don't really want to know. Or, once you learn that information, then what do you do with it? But I think that the like why I've got to where I've got is because I always ask why. I'm always asking why or how or when, and it's always questioning like how can something be different or better, or how do we change this experience? And it's kind of like that's just a natural curiosity that I think anybody could introduce. I mean, it's as simple as like looking at the packaging on your cereal box in the morning. Like, I wonder why they chose this color. Like, what does this color do? If like, why did they choose this type of font? And what are the ingredients? And I think when you just start asking questions daily, like even in your, in your own self dialogue, it just lends yourself to then become more naturally curious. And when you do that, it makes it easier also to take risks, because you're like, well, what's the worst that could happen, or why not? There's always something. So I love questions. It's one of the reasons my original store was named Curious.
I was just going to ask that. I was like, wait a minute. This sounds like this has something to do with this.
Yeah.
That is really cool. And I liked what you touched on about risk taking, because I think, with a lot of the women we interview, that is something that we are so amazed to hear from so many of the women who come on our show, is that they took a risk and they bet on themselves. And although it's inspiring and we have a lot of women who have told that story, there's a lot of people who haven't done that and who are still scared and, have some doubts. So how did you, with honestly everything that you've done, I mean, it sounds like you've taken risk multiple times, not just with this business, but with other things too. How do you get the confidence and comfort level to dive in and take that risk?
I think I look at it as like, we have one experience like on earth, right? As humans. And if you want to make the most of that experience, you have to like constantly push the envelope to evolve. Like, you'd never want to just get to one place and stay there, or I don't anyways. And so I just think of it that way, is like, what is the risk if I don't do this? Like, what would I not learn if I don't do this? And if I do, and I do fail, like there's always a lesson that then I can apply towards something else. And every risk I've taken, like whether it succeeds or fails, like there's always something that I've then grown from and I've evolved. And like the next risk is so much easier to take because I have that background knowledge. And like, I think it's just about starting small, right? Just like trying small different things and getting into the act of risk taking. I say like, we all take risks every single day without thinking about it. Like getting into a car is a risk, or, I mean, they're just so natural to us. And it's like, if you start to think of it that way, it's when risk becomes uncomfortable is usually when there's like a high level of uncertainty behind it, right? Where it's like, I get in the car, I've done this so many times, I know like the likelihood of something bad happening isn't going to be there. But if you're like standing on the edge of the cliff and you've like never parachuted before and you're doing it for the first time, it feels a lot scarier.
Yeah.
But it's also like, I think risk is like how we're perceiving it. And I think that it's when it's brand new, we put a higher fear level on it than if it's something we've repeatedly done.
Absolutely.
That was honestly such a great answer. We are going to post that on our Instagram because I want everybody to hear that. I love the question that you asked where you said, I'm probably not going to say it right, but if I don't do this, what could happen, or, you know, and there's always a lesson to be learned. So that was great.
The risk you take by not taking the risk.
That's
you said it way better, but
I don't even remember what I said. So
that's good. It's just coming. That was really good.
Yeah,
that is so true. And like, so I always think of this when, I mean, I even think of when friends come to me, and I'm sure Paige, you can relate, is, you know, anytime people are making a big decision, I always hear people say, well, just make a pros and cons list. Like, just make a pros and cons list and it'll work itself out. Did you do that ever? Because sometimes I'm like, man, I just don't know if this is the way to quantify how to make a decision. But truthfully speaking, anytime someone comes to me with something that they're wanting opinions on, or even I think of myself when I go to others, that is kind of the feedback I always get thrown around.
I have done it before, but like the question I usually ask is like, well, what's the worst that can happen? Like on both sides, right? So like, because there's always going to be pros and cons, but it's like choose the worst on both sides and then like figure out like is one way or the other. I did it with Tailorie, honestly, the pros and cons a lot, because it was just I knew it was going to be such a big investment of my time. And I was scared. Like I was actually terrified because I was like, how am I going to pull this off? And it's so expensive, and fundraising and all of these things that I had never known about before. Like I've never even had considered. Right. But at the end, I don't know if I go on a pros and cons list. It's more of like what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah. And sometimes I think the more simple, the better. And that's why I'm curious. Cause like I said, you've obviously done some, you know, high risk endeavors with even just moving to New York when you're 18, like that had a lot of risk, but also it must have worked out pretty well because you were there for 10 years. And same with these other opportunities. And, you know, within all of those different things, what do you feel like is next for you? I mean, is Tailorie going to be kind of your bread and butter, or do you have plans beyond this? Because it sounds like you have such a great mind that I can't imagine the wheels stop turning. So what's next?
They don't stop turning, but Tailorie is my focus right now. Like thinking of next is like thinking of our next feature or our next like fundraising round, or but very, very long term down the road, what I would love to do is get into venture capitalist space, angel investing, working with female founders, working with female entrepreneurs, and helping to just coach them and sharing my experiences. I think that that's one of the best ways to give back, is sharing experience. So that's what I look forward to long term.
Well, we love that you were able to share your experience and your wisdom with us today. I think it rang true. So we really appreciate that. We always have a question that we try to ask all of our guests, just because it's so unique to hear their different answers. And so what does a queen mean to you?
A queen. Well, like I like what I see, right? So a queen, just when I think of queen, I think of like a confidence and a presence and like grace and like this underlying like assurance of like just a knowing. And just somebody who really is sure that they're okay with the decisions that they make, right? They're just, that's what a queen is to me. I don't know. I haven't thought of that one before. What's a queen to you?
You know, you are the first person to ever ask us.
Imagine that.
I love that.
That is so good. And first off, your answer is spot on, because we've talked to a lot of women, and the one thing that you can clearly see within everybody's answers and also everyone's interviews is just radiating confidence. But I will bounce off that, because I think something that you said about New York that I really believe in is your vibration, and like how you truly, the energy that you replicate and you spin off of yourself onto others. I think that it's so cool that we've all kind of had that same experience with a city, but I also think that you can feel that experience with people. And I feel like we feel that with you. So that's
Yeah.
what I was like, I'm waiting for her to say something like this because you have such a great energy. Even though we're doing this virtually, you can just tell. But I do feel like that is something that a queen has.
Yeah.
I want to hear yours though.
I would totally agree with that. I think energy for sure, that can really make or break somebody's day. But I think for me, it's just about kindness, spreading kindness, spreading positivity. You never know what people are going through on a day-to-day basis. So just always kind of approaching a situation with grace. I don't always do it perfectly, but I think kind of just having that in the back of your mind. And then both of what you guys said was really great. So yeah. I hope you come to Fargo and let us know and we can all grab coffee.
Yes, I would love that.
Also, I feel like just the fact that you asked us that question, like already titles you the curious queen. Like the fact that you were like, well, what about you guys? I'm like, you are so true to that word.
Yeah.
Like you need to get that patented or something.
I love that.
So, okay, tell us where people can find you, connect, how can you learn more about Tailorie.
So you can go to tailorie.com, tailorie.com. You should also check out our Instagram because our creative team does a beautiful job of highlighting the brands that we're working with, the early users that we're working with. And the app is, if you go to tailorie.com and sign up, you can download the app today. It's fully functioning and open, and it's a really exciting place right now. Like there's so many recommendations coming in every day, and I'm discovering things that I hadn't known of before. And I'm like, yes, this is great. So check out Tailorie. It's a great place to share things that you love.
I love it. So excited. Literally going to be downloading this tonight, and I can't wait to share it with our listeners because I think it's perfect for everybody. But
I agree.
So cool. And thank you again
so
much. This has been so fun. And please send us any updates you receive or any new things that you're adding. We would love to share it with our audience and support you further because it's so clear how much passion you have for this, and we want to share that light with everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies. I appreciate your time and vice versa. I'm happy to share what you're doing as well.